Welcome back, American Lit Scholars. Today we're talking about James Fenimore Cooper and The Slaughter of the Pigeons, Chapter 22 from his novel from the Leatherstocking Tales series, The Pioneers. This is the fourth book of the series of 5, and we see our hero is a much older man here. Now here, of course, is James Fenimore Cooper. The story takes place in the fictional town of Templeton, New York, and Templeton is actually modeled on Cooper's town, as we see here. It's on the banks of the Otsego of Lake Otsego in New York, and it is very much an environmentalist tale. What happens in the beginning of the story? We have the settlers there all in a flurry. All the folks at Templeton are in a rush to get out and go and shoot pigeons. Yes. Now, the pigeon that they're discussing here, and pardon me as I look off to the right where my slides are, is the pigeon in question is the passenger pigeon. Here's what it looked like. This is a massive bird, about 13 inches from beak to tail. And at one point in time, they were everywhere. And the settlers aren't too happy about this because what has happened is the pigeons, when they pass over, have a tendency to go and eat the wheat that is in their green fields. Now, the story opens up with this beautiful description of these vast green fields of wheat where you can see the stumps of trees that were once part of a larger forest just a year before, right? So the citizens of Templeton have cleared the forests in order to plant wheat. And in this scene, there is this description of 2 bald eagles sitting and holding court over this vast green field. And so as a result, all the other birds, including the passenger pigeons, take a detour. They'll go somewhere else because the Americans, the eagles rather, are birds of prey, and they hold dominion here. Now pay attention to that, because that is symbolic language here. What he's talking about here is he's making a statement about America and the Americans' domination of the land here. This is what's happening with the eagles is what's happening with the Americans on the landscape of New York. The titular pioneers, of course, have cleared the forest, and they made way made room for all of this land to plant wheat. And because the passenger pigeons, when they start their fall migration back south, look at this as a great source of food. They land and they come and they clean up, they wipe out a lot of the wheat that the settlers have planted. And so they are having a big pigeon shoot, right? Much in the same way that we disposed of almost hunted the American bison to extinction, they're doing this with the pigeons. Everyone who can carry a gun, everyone who has a field piece, even kids who have little bows and arrows have shown up for this, because there were so many of them that they blacken the sky. One of the characters says there are so many out there you'd have to look for an hour to find a hole in the flock to see the sun showing up through the sky here, right? And because they want to protect their crops, they have all come out en masse to wipe these creatures out. Yeah. And so what happens, there's one guy too who has a field piece, which is an old cannon from the Indian excursions, the Indian Wars, that he's brought out to wipe out these things, take out as many as he can. Now, the cannon's seen better days. It was abandoned out there in the woods when either the fleeing army or the defeated army left it behind. And they've taken it out, refurbished it as best they could. They've knocked the rust off. But the problem is the touch hole, the place where you put the flame to the powder to cause the explosion to send the cannonball out the end of the cannon, is almost as large as the blast hole, the mouth of the cannon itself. Yeah. So you get a sense that this is not the best and the brightest. They've used it for, ceremonial purposes most of the time. They've trotted it out for this pigeon hunt to wipe out as many as possible. And of course, this has attracted the attention of all the little kids here, who are excited about this big thing. Well, in the midst of this, in the midst of this slaughter, we have our hero of the story, Natty Bumppo, come up. He's walked out of the woods. He's an older woodsman now. He's probably in his 70s, if my mathematics are correct. And he's watching the proceedings as all these people are just shooting these birds out of the air and letting them fall. Now, they're not the most accurate of shots, and especially not with the cannon, which is just filled with duck shot. And so they're blasting them out of the sky, and they're just leaving them lying out there in the fields. Not all of them are dead. Some of them are injured and suffering. And so Natty Bumppo comes out, and when he notices this, he says he has quite a few things to say about it. So Natty Bumppo, a man who has spent his entire life living in harmony with nature and learning its ways, says this. This comes of settling a country. Here have I known a pigeon to fly for 40 long years till you made your clearings, and there was nobody to scare to hurt them. I love to see them come into the woods, and for they would accompany to a body, hurting nothing, being as it was as harmless as a garter snake. But now it gives me sore thoughts when I hear the frighty things whizzing through the air, for I know it's only a motion to bring out all the brats of the village. Well, the Lord won't see the waste of his creatures for nothing, and right will be done to the pigeons, as well as the others, and by and by. There's Mr. Oliver, as bad as the rest of them, firing into the flocks as if he was shooting down nothing but Mingo warriors. Right? He doesn't like this. He says, look, you guys, I've known these pigeons to fly through the air for 40 years at a stretch, returning again and again, never hurting anything bigger than a garter snake until you guys came out here and cleared the land and put your fields out here. And then now here you are shooting them down as if they were some sort of enemy to you. The Mingo warriors being, the Indians. If you remember from, if you're familiar with The Last of the Mohicans, Magua and his people were Mingo warriors. And so he stirs this up. He says, look, you people don't know what you're doing. You're creating an environmental disaster here. These creatures don't hurt anybody, and here you are just blasting away at them if they were like some enemy here. And so, of course, he gets some pushback. What, old Leatherstocking, he cried, grumbling at the loss of a few pigeons. If you'd sow your wheat twice and 3 times as I have done, you shouldn't even be so massively feeling toward the devils. Hurrah, boys, scatter the feathers. This is better than shooting in a turkey's head or a neck, old fellow. Natty Bumppo replies, It's better for you, maybe, Billy Kirby, replied the indignant old hunter, and all for them that don't know how to put a ball down a rifle barrel or how to bring it up again with true aim. But it's wicked to be shooting into flocks in this wasty manner, and none to do it which who know how to knock over a single bird. If a body has a craving for pigeon's flesh, why, it's made the same as all other creatures for man's eating. But not to kill 20 to eat one. And when I want such a thing, I go into the woods till I find one to my liking, and then I shoot him off the branches without touching the feather of another, though there might be 100 on the same tree. You couldn't do that thing, Billy Kirby. You couldn't do it if you tried. So here's what he does. He drops a challenge. He throws down a challenge here for Billy Kirby. He says, look, this is wasteful. If I get hungry for pigeon flesh, and they were all put here by the good Lord for our eating, I'll go out there in the forest, I'll find one, even roosting in a tree, and I'll shoot him down and not touch any of the others next to him. Right? My marksmanship is that good, and it's that I don't have to waste shot to get what I want to eat. You couldn't do that if you tried. So, of course, Billy Kirby, being affronted, he has to, tries to pluck one out of the sky, but misses. And in this moment of beautiful moment of marksmanship and standing behind your words, Leatherstocking raises his rifle, plucks one out of the sky, and falls into the lake. His dogs, who have been at his feet, rush out there and get it and bring it back. Now that this, as you might imagine, raises some interest in the folks around him, right? The gathered group come together and they want to hear the matter here and explain what happened. And he says, now look, you guys you're being cruel here. There are lots of these birds out there who are just lying there. They're not killed. They're wounded. It's wrong to, as a hunter and as a humanitarian, essentially, to shoot down a bird and just leave it there suffering. It's wrong to leave any creature suffering that you're hunting. Not only is it wasteful because you got more than you could possibly eat here, but it's cruel. And then Marmaduke, Judge Marmaduke Temple, the founder of Templeton, who is more or less sponsoring the gathering, says, you're right. I think it's time that we put an end to this. We've had enough. Leatherstocking takes the pigeon, goes back into the woods. He says, look, I'm not going to stick around and watch this wholesale slaughter. It's obscene. It's an abomination, and I'm not going to be any part of it. I'm going home. So he heads back to his hut. And so, for a moment, Marmaduke gets it. He listens. He understands. He says, yeah, we really shouldn't be doing this. But then a couple of the other guys start, including Benjamin, who is a former sailor who, as it turns out, can't swim. Says, look, we need to, lower your weapons. We need to get ready. Aim low. We're gonna pluck these guys out of the sky. And somebody else, snaps back at him, and they have this back and forth. And he says, "Stand by me, lads," said Benjamin. "Stand by, my lads," said Benjamin, who had acted as an aide-de-camp on this occasion. "Stand by, my hearties. When Squire Dickens heaves out a signal to begin firing, do you see you may open upon them in a broadside. Take care and fire low, boys. You'll be sure to hold the flock." He's saying, point your guns low. You'll be able to get as many of them as you can in one fell swoop as they pass by. "Fire low," shouted Kirby. Old Kirby. "Hear the old fool. If we fire low, we may hit the stumps, but not ruffle a pigeon." "How should you know, you lubber?" cried Benjamin with a very unbecoming heat for an officer on the eve of battle. "How should you know, you grampus? Haven't I sailed aboard the Boadishey for 5 years, and wasn't it a standing order to fire low in the hull of your enemy? Keep silence at your guns, boys. Mind the order that is passed." "Fire!" cried the sheriff, clapping the coal and priming the cannon as half of Benjamin's charge escaped through the touch-hole. Remember the touch-hole being about the size of the barrel opening now. The whole volley of the musketry preceded the report of the swivel. On receiving this united discharge of small arms from the front of the flock darted upward, and while at the same instant myriads of those in the rear rushed with amazing rapidity to their places, so that when the column of white smoke gushed from the mouth of the little cannon, an accumulated mass of objects was gliding over its point of direction. The gun roared and echoed along the mountains, and died away to the north like distant thunder, while the whole flock of alarmed birds seemed for a moment thrown into disorderly and agitated mass. The air was filled with irregular flight, layer rising above layer, far above the tops of the highest pines, none daring to advance beyond the dangerous pass, when suddenly some of the headers of the feathered tribes shot across the valley, taking their flight directly of the village. Hundreds of thousands in the rear followed from the example, deserting the eastern side of the plain to their persecutors and the slain. Okay. All right. So we have this sort of exchange here among military men. All right. Well, of the whole group. Now, Cooper is kind of making fun of these guys here. Of the whole crowd, Benjamin is the only one who has ever served in the Navy, who's ever been part of a military excursion at all. And the rest of these guys, what he says, when he spoke in a tone unbecoming of a captain, of a commander on the eve of battle. He's speaking in very figurative language. He's being sarcastic. He's making fun of this guy in the whole gathering, essentially, because they're treating this like some military excursion, right? Some battle with these enemies, these birds who really offer them no harm at all. Right? And so this is Fenimore poking fun at him. And it's further borne out by this here. "Victory," shouted Richard. "Victory, we have driven the enemy from the field." And also when he talks about, he talks about the cannon, when they set it off, the touch hole is so big, most of the charge comes out of the back of it and not toward the enemy. The enemy. All right. And so toward the end, the story sums up. Marmaduke comes to realize, maybe we've done something kind of terrible here. Maybe we shouldn't take such pride in the slaughter here so much. Maybe we should be a little more careful with the resources that this country has given us. And it said toward of course, this quickly dissipates when the sheriff says, "Oh, it's a princely sport. We've done a great thing, and there's so much meat out there that every woman, every wife in the village can make a pot pie of these things." And so he dictates to the kids, says, "All right, bring me just the heads of these pigeons. I'll give you 6 pence per 100. So that way they're not laying out there in the field suffering and slowly dying." So he tells us that all the kids in the village go out and they wring the necks of these pigeons, and he refers to them as urchins, little poor kids. Yeah. And so he goes home. And he begins to think about what has happened. And he says, Cooper says it quite eloquently. He says, Judge Temple retired toward his dwelling with the kind of feeling that many a man has experienced before him, who discovers after the excitement of the moment is past that he has purchased pleasure at the price of misery to others. Right? So at least Leatherstocking's message landed with Marmaduke. However, Richard boasted many a year of his shot with the cricket, that's the cannon, and Benjamin gravely asserted that he thought he had killed nearly as many pigeons on that day as there were Frenchmen destroyed on the memorable occasion of Rodney's victory, which was a victory of the English against the combined French and Spanish navies in their attempted invasion of Jamaica during the Revolutionary War, which is significant in that this was an American loss, and that perhaps juxtaposed against the slaughter of the pigeons here, we have the same sort of loss, a loss of our natural fauna. All right. So what Cooper here is doing is making an environmental stand. He's saying, look, we have the potential to be a great country, and this was written some years after the Deerslayer, the first of the Leatherstocking tales. And America had begun to change, and our westward expansion had begun. And for better or worse, we were consuming a lot. We were perhaps not being the best stewards of the land, and certainly not the best of the Native Americans. So he's saying, look, you need to be careful. You need to think about this. He was warning us about the passenger pigeon way back when this novel was written. I think sometime in the late 1700s. The passenger pigeon, the last one, died in captivity in a zoo in 1914. They were headed towards extinction by 1870. There were so many of them that, like as Cooper tells us, that when they would fly somewhere, the skies would be blotted out. We looked at them as a inexhaustible resource, and we hunted them to extinction and shipped their bodies off to the markets for meat until they were gone. So, one thing you'll come to understand as we go through both American history and American literature is the more things change, the more they stay the same. The problems that we go through today in this story could be just as relevant today as when it was written, because we are talking today about conspicuous consumption, about sustainability, about taking care of our resources and our planet. The problem is human nature doesn't change. And the things that we struggle with, unfortunately, it seems that we will always struggle with. Anyway, that is James Fenimore Cooper's Slaughter of the Pigeons from the novel The Pioneers. I hope you enjoyed the story. It's a fascinating tale, and particularly in terms of how we have struggled with the environment and the care of the environment from the very beginning. All right. Well, that's it. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.